When it comes to choosing fabric, this is often the most exciting part of the whole process. I work with organic cottons and a lot of them are hand woven as well. Cotton's a really nice fabric to sew because it's pretty stable and they're usually in manageable weights. Linen is another lovely fabric to use, but it's often a lot more slippy, a bit harder to sew. In terms of other natural fibres, I often like to sew with wool as well. And there's some really interesting fabrics coming through made of hemp at the moment. I would really recommend trying to stick with something sustainably grown. There's a lot of cotton out there which is really irresponsibly sourced, and it's best to try and stick with organic or upcycle or use dead stock fabric if you can. You want to choose a weight of fabric that's suitable for what you're sewing. So for a lightweight shirt, something like this is really suitable. It's really soft to touch and it's a plain weave, but it's got a stripe running through it. That's a hand woven one from India, one of my favourites. This is also a naturally dyed hand woven fabric. Natural dye is a really interesting one, obviously dyed using natural pigments. And these are much softer colours and you get some really nice tones with them. So if you can source natural dyes, that's a really nice one to go for as well. Bit harder to come across, but you might find some fabric shops are branching out a bit. Then we've got twill weaves. So the ones that I've just shown are plain weaves. Twill weaves are when the fabric is it has a diagonal weave going across. So you get this on so many different fabrics in so many different weights. Got a heavier weight one here, so we've got the cream and we've got the navy here. And you just get a really distinct line running across the fabric, and that just means it's a twill weave. This is often quite nice to use for heavier pieces like overshirts and trousers. So yeah, keep an eye out for twill weaves. You get a lot of denims in twill. And then it's really lovely to play with stripes and checks or prints or spots or whatever it is. So you do need to take into account cutting the garment in different directions. For example, quite often if something's stripy, the back yoke across this back section, the stripes will go horizontal and the rest of the stripes of the garments will go vertical. So it's just something to be aware of, but it's really nice to play with the different stripes going in different directions. And checks are a favourite of mine as well. So have fun with sourcing and head to any local shops you have, along with antique markets and vintage markets can be great for finding old rolls of fabrics. So yeah, it's quite an exciting thing to build up your own supply. Sewing garments is all about seam construction, and there's a few different ways that you can do it. This is one of our favourite tops. It's the Frida shirt. This is one of the more simple pieces to sew in that there's not much to it. It's like a lovely round neck, quite simple top. It's constructed with a French seam. So this is a really nice way to finish a garment with a nice enclosed seam. And on the outside, you have a seam that you can't really see. And then on the inside, you have a really nice enclosed seam there. All the raw edges of the fabric are tucked inside the sewing, and that's what we want to try and do when we're making our pieces. So this one is a French seam. We then also have a run and fell seam, which is something that I use quite a lot in my designs. It gives it a slightly heavier look, and you'll recognise it from jeans, even though they're not usually sewn quite the same technique, but it's got the double stitch edge on the outside, so you get sort of like a slightly chunkier effect. And on the inside, again, all the raw edges are tucked away and nicely concealed. And this is Really nice to do on a more workwear type piece. You can even match up the seam details with stitching details, so we get double stitching around the pockets, and it's nice to use seam construction to match up with the fabric and the design to get a garment that feels like it's really nicely constructed. Along with a run and fell seam, we will also be using a little bit of overlocking. For overlocking, you can use an overlocking machine, which is quite a specialist piece of kit. A lot of people do have them at home, domestic machines, but I also think it's absolutely fine to use a zigzag stitch on your standard domestic sewing machine. So that's why it's good to get a machine that can do a good zigzag. It's a slightly messier finish, but if you're sewing at home, sewing for yourself, I don't want to let having an expensive piece of kit get in the way of making nice garments. So classically, a pair of trousers will be overlocked on the inside edge here. So this seam is overlocked together along the trouser leg and then top stitched on the outside of the leg. We also like to add extra work for ourselves, but making garments look really, really nice. I do often like to add binding to various pieces. So we do binding on the trousers. So if you're following along to the trouser workshop at some point, you'll be practicing binding. Along with the Frida shirt, actually, we do binding around the neck. And this is using a different piece of fabric to enclose the seam. So on the trousers, it's an extra little detail we do just at the bottom of the leg. So when you turn up your trousers, when you're wearing them, you get a little flash of different colour and different texture.